Good morning. It's 10 a.m. in Palm Beach and in New York, but mainly in Palm Beach, because we are talking to Andy Hall from the Hall Art Foundation and Museum Schloss Derneburg, which is one, I find, of one of the most spectacular art destinations in the world. It's a little trip to get there. By train, half an hour from Hanover, which is in Lower Saxony in Germany. It's a castle which used to serve as a studio of painter Georg Baselitz and is beautifully, very sensitively restored, and I think houses up to 6 shows at a time with a sculpture park around it, and closed at the moment, I guess. We're gonna hear from Andy, and so let's see if we find him and hear what he thinks about this whole situation and about the coming months. Andy. Here we are. Okay. Hi, Andy.
Good morning, Johan. Good afternoon.
How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. And you?
It's okay. We are the second day open today.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because you can, the visitors can come visit the gallery based on a time ticket system. And it's always one guest per visit, including friends and family.
Right.
But it's you are like alone in the gallery, and it's very interesting to see how people arrive on time. They take the time serious and enjoy the big upstairs space of the gallery for themselves. And what's nice is that they really, I mean, they're like clients living down the street, and they miss shows. Because you think you always have the opportunity to go, but then you don't go, And now I think everybody is so happy in Berlin that slowly things are reopening and everybody's very cautious. But these time tickets really work. So so far it seems like even a positive advantage to it. Besides, it's interesting to see how what this all will bring us, and how it's really changing the perspective. Only in this week I would have been at 4 places.
Exactly.
We would have opened Art Cologne yesterday. Alicia Quadro would have meant to have a big show in Düsseldorf. Then on Monday we had a big project in Milan, and you kind of
well, maybe we reevaluate. Maybe we reevaluate what's really important.
And
Bill
you are
Gates
completely quarantined, right?
Say that again?
Oh, sorry. You were saying Bill Gates wrote an essay?
Oh, yeah. Bill Gates wrote an essay a couple of weeks ago saying how this whole coronavirus experience will force all of us, society, to reevaluate what's really important. And, Bill Gates has been something of a prophet with this whole coronavirus thing. You probably saw the TED Talk he gave 3 or 4 years ago, where he essentially predicted this whole thing and said we should take measures to prepare ourselves for a pandemic. And of course we didn't listen. Well, Obama actually did set up a special unit to monitor potential pandemics starting outside of America. And he did that following the Ebola virus crisis. And of course, that was one of the first things that Trump closed down. He's obviously tried to destroy everything that Obama did. And one of the things Trump did was to close down this special unit that had been set up to monitor potential pandemics. Anyway, Bill Gates, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, wrote a really interesting short essay talking about how we're probably going to reevaluate in our lives what's important. And just as you were saying, how, people have slowed down, I just look at our life. We live here. We don't go out to restaurants anymore, but you know what? We've actually quite enjoyed cooking our own meals. It's an experience. And I don't know, we were just talking about that this morning. How quickly will we want to go back to living the life we were leading just 2 months ago? It's an interesting question.
Yeah, very interesting for us also because I mean I live now I can really appreciate living at workplace and also having that much space. But then interesting was for the family at the beginning we had some conflicts also, the kids homeschooling, but now we kind of grooved into it, and I think I never had a better time at home ever before. And although I must say, it's not really that there's not much to do. I think that the days are even fuller, and the workload is, because a meeting usually maybe you had like 2-3 meetings a day. Now you have like 5, and then the day restarts in the afternoon because then New York wakes up, and then you have and before Zoom meetings felt like even you pick up the phone, call someone in Vienna easier than calling someone in New York, but now our distance is all the same distance if it's wherever it is. And are you making plans already when to return to Danneberg, or you can't plan that at this point?
Well, yeah, we're talking about it all the time. Of course, it's difficult for us because we're 3,000 miles away. We have a team there at the moment. We've had to postpone all the exhibitions that we were planning to open in June. We had 4 or 5 new exhibitions planned, but they've all been put on hold at the moment. And I don't know when Christine and I will be able to travel to Germany. We have to be particularly careful because Christine is asthmatic, and we really can't afford to get this thing, so we can't take any risks in that regard. But we do, our collection manager, Alex Haviland, is in Danneberg at the moment. He's been there for the past 2 months. He sort of got trapped there. He'd flown over to start preparations for installing the new exhibitions for this summer. But as I said, all those have now been put on hold. As you know, it's very difficult to ship art at the moment. So even if everything were to go back to normal tomorrow, we've lost 2 months of preparation time. So there's no way that we're going to be opening in June. Possibly we can open in September, but with a different format than previously. So we're keeping all our options open. We're continuing to work on longer term projects. We have a lot of things planned for Danneberg for the coming years. We have more buildings to develop there to turn into additional exhibition spaces in the old domain of the monastery. And we're working on all those plans. But for the next 6 months, anything's possible. And my friends who are experts in the field, the people who know about medicine and healthcare, they tell me that it may be a couple of years before we get back to normal. Until we have a vaccine for coronavirus, it's going to be difficult to really get back to traveling like we used to travel, to socialize like we used to socialize. And the risk is, here in America, as you are in Germany, they're already relaxing the guidelines on social distancing. And of course, the risk is that once they do that, we see the incidence of the disease come back. And I read every day so many articles, and people are warning that once will there be a slowing down this summer, but once we get to the end of the summer and beginning of next winter, that things could get crazy again. So I don't know. We just have to keep our options open and see what happens.
And tell me something which has been circulated in the news now, and maybe you can shed some light on, because you're an expert and made a fortune in trading oil, and now it says that the oil value is negative. So if I
Yeah.
take a barrel oil, it comes with cash. Is that right?
Well, sort of. I mean, it's a, you know, like all these things, it's never quite as simple as it appears. But the futures contract, which is what everyone looks at, the thing that trades the mercantile exchange, that is a particular grade of crude oil that is delivered. If most futures contracts never get exercised, you know, people buy them, then they sell them before expiration. But if you hold them to expiration, you basically have to, if you own them, you have to take delivery of the oil. And the oil that is specified in the futures contract is a particular grade of oil called West Texas Intermediate, and it's delivered at a place in Oklahoma. And you know, if you own that contract, you have to take delivery of the oil. And right now, all the oil tanks in Cushing are full up. There's no room to store the oil. So you can't store it there, so you've got to ship it out. And there are a limited number of pipelines which you can do that with, and they are completely full. You can't book space on them. So if you own oil for delivery in the month of May, you've got a problem. You can't put it in an oil tank, and you can't ship it out of Oklahoma because there's no pipeline capacity. What do? You have to basically find some way of getting it out. And in extremis, that means putting it on a tanker truck or whatever. And that's very expensive. So yes, if you own oil for delivery in the month of May, you probably have to pay someone to take it from you. And that's why the prices went negative a couple of days ago.
And this means, so the boats or you have to keep your boat circulating on the ocean, right?
This is in Oklahoma. This has nothing to do with boats. This is an inland delivery point. And as I say, you know, if you're taking delivery of the oil, I mean, you've got to do something with it. You either have to put it in an oil tank, or you've got to ship it out. But you know, it's an inland place, so you've got to put it into a pipeline, or you've got to put it on a rail car or on a truck and move it somewhere else, and that's very expensive, and that's why the prices went negative. And you know, that's next month's delivery.
And that happened because the industry is not using oil for production and airplanes and stuff, right?
Global oil consumption was running at around 100 million barrels a day before this all started. And it's estimated that because of coronavirus and all the economic dislocations, you know, no one's flying, no one's going on cruise ships. So the consumption of oil has collapsed. And it's been estimated that demand for oil has dropped from about 100 million barrels a day to 70 million barrels a day. So there's an excess of supply over demand of about 30 million barrels a day. And that means inventories, stocks have been building very rapidly, and all the storage capacity for this oil is almost completely full. So there's nowhere to put the oil.
And could it happen that then the owners of the oil just dispose it in the ocean or in the nature?
No. I mean, what happens is production ultimately gets shut in. I mean, and that's what's happening in various places now. I mean, OPEC finally agreed with the Russians to start shutting down production or reducing production. I mean, immediately after about a month ago, they thought this was an opportunity to increase production and cause prices to fall, and in a way destroy the American oil industry, which has been thorn in their flesh for the past 5 or 10 years. You know, all the new oil supply in the world has come from America. American oil production has risen by about 10 million barrels a day over the past 10 years. So the Russians and the Saudis saw this as an opportunity to basically destroy the US oil industry. But they kind of overshot the mark, and the Saudis actually increased production at the time when demand was falling. But now it's completely out of control, and I think they finally realized that this doesn't make a lot of sense. And anyway, there's nowhere for this oil to go. So oil production is now being shut in. I mean, the Saudis and the Russians have agreed to reduce oil production starting next month. And in the meantime, already production in places like Texas and Canada and so on is falling very rapidly. So no, oil won't be just like hosed into the ocean, God forbid, but you know, it will be just shut in. People will close the valves on oil wells, and oil will be left in the ground.
Mm-hmm. And how, if we think that further, what consequences will it have? And maybe to circle back to the art market, art world, what is this only an intermediate situation, or?
Well, that's the question everybody's asking, and I don't think anybody knows the answer to the question. I mean, how quickly will things go back to normal? How quickly will people want to go out and eat in restaurants? How quickly will people want to go and stay in hotels? How quickly will people want to get on an airplane and fly somewhere else for a vacation or for a business meeting? You were saying how you're doing a lot of Zoom meetings now. I mean, now I know, Johan, I mean, I was always amazed at your travel itinerary. I think the last time I saw you've been in 3 continents in the space of a week. Will you go back to doing that, or will you say, you know what, I don't really need to do that. I can operate more efficiently by having a meeting on Zoom or FaceTime or whatever. And that's true of everybody. How quickly will any of us go back to traveling in the way we did? And you know, travel, airplanes and cars and ships, cruise ships, you know, that's what generates the demand for oil. But at the same time, you know, those are sources of employment, they're sources of wealth generation. And if people choose not to fly on airplanes and drive cars and go to hotels, for all those industries are obviously going to be severely impacted. And the people who earn their money in those industries and generate wealth in those industries are not going to be earning money, and they're not going to be generating wealth. And that obviously has a huge impact on everything, including the art market. Now, maybe other things ultimately come to fill their place. It used to be that, you know, 50 years ago, wealth was made in coal mines. You know, coal was displaced by oil. Oil already was being displaced by renewable energy, and new fortunes and new sources of employment will be created in other industries. But the process is very painful as people lose their jobs, you know, rapidly, and new jobs are created slowly. So and always less, no? Well, yeah, I mean, because of technology, yeah, we get more efficient. On the other hand, you know, I mean, it's a funny thing. Is it a bad thing that people no longer have to work down coal mines? I don't think so. You know, I've been amusing myself over the past few months researching my family ancestry. You know, there's this website, Ancestry.com, and I looked at it 5 or 10 years ago and kind of got fed up with it. And I went back to it and just recently and, you know, looked at it further. And I discovered I had a great grandfather, maybe it was a great grandfather. And this was back in 1860. And at the age of 13, he was working in a coal mine. Now, was that a great thing? I mean, I don't think so. And the fact that people had to work, you know, 50 or 60 hours a week until they literally dropped dead of old age, you know, was that a great thing? I don't think so. And if we can organize the economy so that, you know, people only have to work 20 hours a week or 30 hours a week, I mean, enough to keep them kind of interested and they have time to do other things, that, to my mind, isn't a bad thing. What is bad is when technology creates enormous wealth that isn't bad. That's great that, technology creates enormous wealth. But what's bad is when all that wealth is concentrated in the hands of very few people. And that's, what you have certainly in America today. America on paper is the wealthiest country in the world. But that is a very misleading statistic because that wealth is very badly, very poorly distributed. We have enormous poverty here in America, and you're seeing it now. We don't have the social network, the social support network that you have in Germany, that exists in Europe, that exists, I believe, in other OECD countries in Asia. I'm going to sound like a raging socialist here, and before anyone says that Andy Hall is a communist or a socialist, let me say that one of the reasons, my wife and I live in America is we emigrated from England in the 1970s because it was Britain was being run by, a bunch of politicians who wanted to make Britain look like communist Czechoslovakia or something, and we weren't interested in that. But, there's a balance in all these things, and I think, I spend, as you know, a lot of time in Europe now, and especially in Germany, and I'm really struck by how Germany has done an amazing job of finding the right balance between incentivizing people on the one hand and providing a sort of social contract on the other. And America hasn't been able to do that.
It's very frightening to see that Trump says ends the sentence of that the mask might be helpful, but that he's not going to wear one. In Germany, we discussed, we had this amazing support package for artists and freelancers, and in midst of this discussion, there came again the demand for an unconditioned ground payment, like a flat fee everybody gets. Right. What do you think about these kind of concepts?
Yeah, I mean, they make sense. I have to confess, I haven't studied the mechanics of this, but I mean, as a general idea, it's not totally stupid. I mean, there have been various suggestions of this sort. One sort is to have, which I did look into, and this was a few years ago, and it seemed to make a lot of sense to me. You have a negative income tax. So, if you don't earn above a certain amount of money, the IRS or the tax authorities give you money. I mean, look, you and I don't need to be getting 1,000 euros a month from the government. But if let's say you're earning below a certain amount, then it makes sense that these people's incomes get topped up by some additional amount of money. The problem with all these things, what conservatives say is that if you just give people money, you disincentivize them. And they have these tropes. Reagan started it. He spoke about welfare queens, which is a thinly veiled sort of racist trope. But the idea, and conservatives really kind of hew to this idea that there are a lot of people who, given the opportunity, will just sponge off of the state. They will not work. They will be happy to collect their welfare checks and not work. Sure, you'll get some people like that, but I think most people actually are ambitious. They have some motivation, and they don't want to be dependent on other people. But bad things happen. You can get unlucky. You can have ill health. You can have some sort of disaster. And I think in any civilized society, there needs to be a social safety net. And actually, I think, contrary to what the conservatives here in America say, I think the existence of a social safety net can actually be a strong incentive because it can motivate people to take risks that they might not otherwise take. If you know that, hey, let's say you want to start a business and it doesn't work out. Well, if you know that you're not going to be thrown out on the street, you might be more inclined to take that risk. You know, and here in America, you take a risk. Let's say you decide to start your own business and it doesn't work out. Well, you know, you could be literally on the street, a homeless person. And I would say that could be a powerful disincentive to taking the kind of risks that are needed in a vibrant entrepreneurial economy.
Yeah, and on top, probably a friendlier one. You know, less of a killing instinct one. Yeah. I mean, I think the only thing which always needs to be, because the opponents say that it doesn't really profit or value enough those who take risks, but I don't think that's true, because the only thing which needs to be always possible is that those who take the risk, of course, profit from taking the risk. But that doesn't mean I also think that I noticed that with my team. I mean, of course, they're very highly trained and motivated and so on, but I noticed they really wanted to, you know, working is content of daily life, and also being in exchange with others, and being, I don't know, co-building something and being part of a certain activity first before it's money. Of course, it's always important to have, for example, we tripled our incentives, but that we didn't actually we did because I thought it's more important that the salespeople dare to stay in touch, you know, and don't feel uncomfortable about, because I think we have very mündig, you know, very independent and self judging clients. But I think to stay still and in shock frozen, it doesn't help. I think we need to be in dialogue, and I wanted to incentive at least.
Yeah, but I think
reaching out, you know.
So what you're saying is, you know, people, it's not just, people are not just incentivated by the idea of making money. I mean, obviously money is an important motivator, but I think most people look for more than that in a job. They look for some sort of social experience, for some intellectual content, you know, a decent environment. You know, I don't know. I mean, look, I'm not a sociologist, and people have written about, you know, there's this hierarchy
being
of needs.
Part of something, as well.
Yeah, well, that's important. Yeah.
And one thing I always wondered, I think I never asked you, where comes you have like an amazing, really, I think widely not yet known how deep and various your collection is also on German post-war art. And where comes your fascination from? You are British, from British descent. Where comes your fascination for German art?
You know, a lot of people have asked me that question, and I've never really been able to come up with a really good one-line answer. You know, Christine, my wife, and I have been interested in art, you know, as long as we've known each other, and we've known each other like for a really long time. You know, we would go to museums together, and we weren't trained in art history or anything. We're both scientists by training. I'm a chemist. I actually specialized in quantum chemistry, like your wonderful Angela Merkel. And Christine, funnily enough, trained as a microbiologist, which, you know, during the age of Corona is sort of interesting. But so for us, art was an interest, and as we got older and so on, it became a passion. And about 20 years, it became an obsession. And as we learned more about art and we got exposed to more art, you know, we'd always, all the art forms, I guess painting had always appealed to us the most. And we were always drawn to more expressionistic painting. And, you know, when you study the history of art, and again, I'm not an art historian and I don't pretend to be, but as I understand it, you know, the arc of art historians and scholars like to analyze art and its history, at least, and I know it's all now Western culture. We now have to expand our horizons and all that. But in the traditional way of studying, at least Western art, there's been this arc that has gone through the Renaissance and so on. But it's invariably ended up coming through France and Impressionism and then the Cubists and so on. But there's an alternative arc that takes you through Northern Europe, through Scandinavia, Munch, for example, and then that takes you through Germany. And it's a very expressionistic form of painting. And we were drawn to that just accidentally. And the more we dug into it, the more interesting we found it. And then I think also, having grown up in England, we grew up in post-war England. I was born in 1950, so right after the end of the Second World War, and we actually, when I was a kid, there was still food rationing in England, unbelievably, and so we were kind of aware of the war, and the culture at the time was, we read comic books, and we would go to the movie theater, and you would see movies about World War II, and you read comic books where there would be, British war heroes and this sort of thing. And Germany was kind of like this other. It was kind of like this, the Germans were the baddies,
Yeah,
so that
yeah.
obviously immediately had a kind of maybe
attraction.
An attraction, maybe maybe that's normal. Maybe I'm a contrarian. I don't know. But that was kind of interesting. Who are these people? And
the
so
dark side.
It was kind of like on the dark side. So that had its own attraction, of course. But also, I think, frankly, post-war German art has been, to my mind anyway, much more interesting than post-war British art. And so our collection, it is disproportionately, for an American, or for Americans, we have a disproportionate amount of German art in our collection. But we do have a lot of American art, and we have some British art, but not as much as you might expect for two people who grew up and still are, at least legally, part British. So in German, and by the way, German history is so fascinating to me. When I was at school in England, of course, we were taught history, but it has a very Anglo-centric focus. It's all about the history of the British Isles, and the rest of Europe is just a footnote. But as we've spent more and more time in Germany, we've really studied now German history, and it's so interesting. Obviously the tragic recent history of Germany, but it's remarkable now. Here Germany, in a way, has become once again a leading world power, and right now in this crisis is in some ways leading the way forward. And that to me is remarkable. And I actually, when I think about coronavirus and what it's doing to us, we have now 22 million people unemployed in America. It's unbelievable. It's unthinkable, actually. If someone had said 3 months ago we would have 22 million unemployed people come April, people would say, "What, are you nuts?" But here we are. But I think, what? When I think about, Germany, at the end of World War II, look at the state that Germany was in at that point. And look at where Germany is today.
But also what it, this is, if you look into the artistic careers of all these post-war German artists, that had an amazing impact, of course. Also the division of the country, fleeing from the east to the west, and how to deal with the guilt of our ancestors and exactly. Parents and grandparents and so on.
Yeah, and that was where we got really interested in German art, when we, artists like Beuys and obviously Kiefer and Baselitz and their peers who addressed the recent history of Germany, and had sort of been swept under the carpet a bit. And I think immediately when the war ended, we were on to, in a way, the next war, the Cold War with the communists in Russia, and so I think America at that point was kind of was already fighting the next war, so let's not dwell too much on the past. And as I understand it anyway, in the immediate aftermath in Germany, no one wanted to address this recent history, but some of the artists like, so Beuys and Baselitz and Kiefer and some of the others, they did, confront it, and that's kind of very interesting.
And talking about like what crisis and things like this can turn into, you think also there will be a eventual positive turnout, like for the US in going through this? Doesn't look like it, right?
I hope so, but I don't know. I mean, we every so often we kind of wake up early in the morning, and have this vague feeling of dread, or sort of basic anxiety attack, I guess. And it's not really because of coronavirus. It's because of Donald Trump. I mean, I find Donald Trump and the people around him, and frankly, pretty much the entire Republican Party these days, I find them much more disturbing and scary than coronavirus. I mean, coronavirus can be dealt with by science. We ultimately will develop ways to deal with it. But I mean, when we have people like Trump in charge of the most powerful country in the world, I mean, this is seriously scary. And the fact that 40% of America, or 45% of America, or whatever the number is, of the population still support this, and now I'm going to be frankly a little outspoken, that support this sociopathic moron, I find that very disturbing. I mean, what does it say about this country?
But back to your idea of making clear that you're not a socialist. Were you a Bernie Sanders supporter?
No, absolutely not. In fact,
no?
I think Bernie Sanders, I mean, I don't think he's evil. He's not a sociopath in the way that Donald Trump is. But I think Bernie Sanders is equally dangerous. I mean, he's another demagogue. I mean, he's a personality cult. And again, I mean, look, Hitler was a personality cult. Donald Trump has become a personality cult. And I think Bernie Sanders had that sort of personality cult quality. I'm not comparing him with Hitler, but this demagogic quality, which you're seeing more and more in politics around the world. And I think that's a very disturbing development.
But also in business, you see that, huh? Like more and more like Elon Musk, kind of like sectic.
This messianic kind of quality. And it is sort of, and maybe that's a function of the way we communicate now, via social media and
identify to strong personalities, identifying with them or to an image they are. Who knows who they are really,
Exactly. And that's why it's so wonderful when we, at least for me, and of course I'm biased because I'm a big fan of Germany, but when I look across and I see Angela Merkel, and she is I'm sure she has her faults, and I don't follow German politics, super closely. I don't appreciate all the nuances, and I'm sure she's made some mistakes, and I'm sure if you're German, or some Germans find her intensely irritating, but how refreshing it is to see a top politician, the leader of a country, just approach things in such a calm, dispassionate, rational way compared with what we have here in America.
What really impressed me, all these like Macron talked about going to war. There were in all these like leader speeches, there were all these like war analogies of like, we have this invisible enemy,
right,
and we have to fight it, and which is totally pointless. And she made a speech with really, she was like kind of embracing the family idea, holding together, being distant to support each other by the same time, and that was really like moving, and I don't know, felt kind of supportive in a way, it talked to the ratio and
well, and she also, as I understand it, she displays a certain humility. When she made the initial address to the country about coronavirus, she was very forthright, saying, "Look, well, there's a lot we don't know about this, but we have to take it super seriously, and it could get really bad." And she was honest. She displays a basic honesty, whereas politics here in America has just become, for as long as I can remember, in a way, it's been an entertainment. I mean, news is entertainment here, and politics was presented as, discussions between opponents were not viewed as discussions about policies, but about personalities. And really, when politics had been debased to the point where it was just reality television, is it surprising that we have a reality TV star as the president?
I thought of this part of Back to the Future. I think also when Michael J. Fox visits Trump, I think it's also kind of a crisis in the movie. I can't really remember. Last question. And how do you what do you look at? Do you read? Do you watch something to I don't know, maybe forget a little bit about all this outside?
You mean
you can recommend us something? What are you you have some tip for those still isolated?
What do you mean in terms of reading books and so on?
Reading books, watching. I mean, Klaus Biesenbach said he wrote out a giant piece of paper and he writes all his memories on it.
Oh yeah. So I just finished reading a great book, but again, this reflects my own interest. But I was talking about German history. So there's a brilliant book. It was written about 10 years ago, but it's available. It's in publication. It's written by a British author. He's called Simon Winder, and the book is called Germania, and it's a history of Germany. But it is a highly entertaining book. It's I don't know if you know the American writer Bill Bryson, but he became quite popular some years ago for writing books about complex subjects in a way that were very approachable, and they were also very, very amusing. Well, this guy, Simon Winder, has written an incredibly serious and very profound history of Germany, but it's hilarious. It's full of anecdotes and his own personal observations. So I really recommend that book to anybody, and I think my German friends especially. So yeah, I just finished reading that book, and I'm just starting reading a book by the American writer and scientist Brian Greene, and I forget the title of it, but if you go on Amazon, I'm sure you can find it. And Brian Greene is a brilliant physicist at Columbia University. He's one of the people who invented string theory, and he's a real sort of Renaissance man. He's also very interested in the arts and culture. He writes exceedingly well, and he's just come out with a new book where he discusses. It's a very philosophical book, but written in a very approachable way, and he discusses really the meaning of the universe and the temporary nature of the universe, and by extension the temporary nature of our own lives and of humanity. But I barely started it, but it seems like a super interesting book. There are many others.
Maybe
those are the two books that immediately spring to mind.
Super, yeah, that's good. The one with Germania sounds amazing. I can also recommend for those interested in our country here. It's a podcast series Ian McGregor did for the BBC, and he explores from Meissen porcelain to Adidas. All the German.
Ian McGregor. Okay.
Yeah, it's really entertaining. It's like 15-minute short podcasts, and super interesting, from like high literature to from all different aspects of German history.
Okay, so you just reminded me, and I'm sure everybody now is watching more Netflix and a little bit of TV. We allow ourselves an hour or so after dinner in the evening. So so two Netflix things that we've just finished watching, and I recommend both of them. Again, brings us back to Germany. I mean, I don't know what it is, but the first is Babylon Berlin.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
Which is an amazing kind of set in Berlin in 1929. Incredibly high production values, great acting, just wonderful kind of series. Quite long. I think it's the third series just finished now. But the other one we just watched is a more recent one called Unorthodox.
Fantastic! I just saw it.
It's just a four-part mini-series, but absolutely fantastic. I think very
super well done.
Very touching, kind of very hopeful in a way, but poignant drama. Really recommend that too.
And I think that it also shows Berlin on a realistic way. You know, the freedom and the liberty and so on. And did you notice the name of the pornographic photographer in Babylon Berlin?
Remind me.
Johann Koenig.
Oh, Koenig, right? Yes, I think when that first popped up, I think we laughed and we said, "Are they having a joke here?" Yeah, right. Yeah, you're
and
right.
you know, he's reenacting porn scenes with the Kaiser, you know, and then I met what's the name of the director again?
Yeah, I've forgotten.
So I met him at Berghain at the Techno Club. I meet him there and I say to him like, "Hey, what does my name do in your TV show?" And then he said, "Oh, you know, I thought it's a little nice homage to you, because and now I was in hospital and when I got my cornea transplant and I read the audiobooks and I read it's also very interesting, the original book by, I also forgot the name of the author, who wrote it's called The Dead Fish."
Yeah,
and it's a best-selling book 10 years ago, or 15, and there the name appears. So I believed him. I thought he was really referring to me, but he just made that up.
So it's just a coincidence then.
Yeah.
I see. Funny. Well,
super. It was very entertaining talking to you. Say to Christine, and I really hope to see you soon in the wonderful Lower Saxony in nature.
I hope so too, Johan. All right.